Hey, I'm Ossie from Three Monkeys Solderless, home of the no tool, no stripping cool cable that you just screw your ends on. Both audio and DC cables available, formable cable in all kinds of cool colors. Great sounding stuff, performs well. Well, thanks for tuning in and welcome to my channel, where I like to goof around on the weekends and after hours on my own kind of projects and my own idiocy mostly. I think anybody that's been watching it can get an idea of what it's about. Just like to have fun and experiment and see what we can come up with, and just keep busy and work in the milieu, so to speak. So what are we going to do today? So I think you can get an idea right now that we've obviously got the Sall Box 3 pedal board set up here in the submarine studio. And this is about chasing that first album tone again. And what I really wanted to do today, I guess, is we'll call this Sall Box 3, let's say stage 1. Because we're going to be working with this board periodically and moving things in and out and trying different things to get where we want to go. And what I said was like this, trying to get the smallest, most convenient, least expensive package to get close to that first album sound. Now, if you're familiar with the channel, and you might have seen some of the other videos where we were pursuing that end, you might have seen us slaving Marshalls together back there, or putting two 1176 compressors together in this effects loop, or in between two amps, trying to go for that sound. And that's all based upon what my theories are about how that particular waveform, let's call it, was achieved. Now, my theory might be different than a lot of people's. I don't know. But I'm of the opinion that most of the grind and most of the grit and most of the character of that sound, although the amplifier was important, most of that came from what came after the amplifier. Now, I mean, we can all agree that, the sound was sort of there in terms of, the basic raw sound. I mean, you can hear the club stuff from the, before the signing, and see that there was still that, that sound there. But that sort of top end sheen, that overly dramatic distortion, all of that, I think, was a process of the studio itself dealing with what really was a stock Marshall amp, a stock Plexi, more than likely alone, and with maybe something boosted in the front and a few pedals. So that's what we were sort of building here, and we were trying to focus more on the post as opposed to the pre, right? Now, let's say what I'm talking about here is, and I've had some people contacting me about this sort of thing, like asking, there's got to be an easier way to do this. And maybe there is. I don't know. And I've got some guys that I'm kind of working with and bouncing things back and forth as well. But this, if you really look at it, right, if you really want to get into the science of it all, right, this is the instrument. It really is. It wasn't the guitar and it wasn't the Marshall. This is what you're hearing, the microphone. Or, like, where's the SM57? Well, it's around here somewhere. Well, here it is. The SM57, the Neumann, whatever it would have been. This is the instrument, okay? This is what is providing the signal, not the Marshall, right? You're listening to the diaphragm. You're listening to how it moves back and forth and creates a voltage inside of the little, windings in there, and then comes out and goes into a preamplifier, right? A mic preamp, and then a board with EQs, and has compressors in it and all kinds of things that you can use to manipulate the signal. But really, this is the signal that was important. What was in this particular unit, not this one, but, in a microphone. That is what you're hearing. Now, I think the amplifier tone was probably in the room at Sunset, was very close to what you would have heard in the bootlegs, right? It had that, it was definitely gained up. It was not as gained up as it was perceived to be in the way that the album turned out sounding. Now, a lot of that has to do with, well, what is distortion, and how do we perceive what's distortion, and what does distortion do? And what are tricks that studios use revolving around distortion, even on things like vocals and drums and, every instrument. It adds harmonics and quality to the original signal that normally wouldn't be there, right? So let's say like on something like, I've always said this, like let's say a Mariah Carey vocal from like the 90s, right? No human's voice sounds like that in the room. There is a certain level of, there's a certain silk to it, a certain frequency that's present above the normal frequency of a voice, you know, going up to 20K, going up into, you know, dog area. And I'm not talking about her high-pitched voice. I'm talking about the quality that was on her voice that made it sound like ripping silk. A lot of that is due to harmonic distortion, right? And they would use certain devices or certain techniques to increase that distortion, compressing it, exciting it, tape compression. All of these different things would create a quality to the original signal that didn't exist. And I think that's what was going on with that signal. And I've queued up on the floor here my Mac into the mixer just to kind of talk about something. Now, this is an isolated track, and I don't really care about copyright strikes. I've got a ton of them because, you know, I like to listen to classical music while I make stuff, and I like to, you know, play along with with drum tracks, but I'm not looking to monetize anything, so I don't really care. But who knows, maybe we'll get a copyright strike for this all of 1 second of this particular isolated guitar track. Now, this is the isolated guitar track from I'm the One. All right, and it's about a 1 second portion of it where you can hear, it's the part where it goes, you know, like you know, that part after. And you can absolutely hear through the song, especially on this isolated track, how more distorted the guitar gets as it goes through, as probably they were either crushing it harder with the compressors or they were just blasting, you know, the preamp, or, you know, when they're bouncing tracks, just kind of like cranking the crap out of it during the mix down to blow out, you know, the track itself and make it more distorted. Now, when you listen to this, just the part that goes, listen to that. It's this distortion that, in my opinion, is board distortion. So let's cue that up and listen to it. Hear that? It's a wow. That to me sounds like an overdriven console, right? And it adds all kinds of grit and grab and grind to it that just is not what an amplifier does, right? It sounds like almost like when you crank your dad's stereo too loud and it starts crapping out, but not as broken up, right? As you're not getting into what's called like blocking distortion. You're just distorting it sweetly, right? So let's hear it again. So that's sort of where I'm at. I think if you listen to that, take your time now and listen to that track. And I think you'll start to hear, put on some good headphones and listen to that track. And I think you'll hear what I'm talking about. That there was definitely microphone, board, compressor, whatever it was, pre-distortion that was a factor after the guitar itself was recorded. Now, that makes it very difficult for practical reasons of duplicating that sound, right? Because now you're talking about, well, how do you duplicate a sound that comes after the amplifier, right? In a practical way to practice with. I mean, am I going to have to sit in a studio all day, you know, where I'm listening to, you know, not my amplifier, but I'm listening through headphones to what happens after it's mic'd and after it goes, you know, through the preamp and through the EQ and through the compressors and through the exciters and through the limiters and all this stuff, and then reaches my headphones. I don't think that's a practical way of doing anything. You know, you can get close to that if you're lucky enough to be like in a big band, a big touring band where you have, you know, a whole front of house setup and you're on in-ears and you can really get a pretty cool sound doing that. But for most of us, we can't do that. It's just not practical to do it. So what I wanted to do was to try to find another way to skin the cat, right? To get to creating that, let's say, distorted post signal. So this was sort of like the concept. And this is, you know, 1.0, and we're probably going to be taking things off and on this board a lot. So what have we got? All right, so we're entering in to a buffer that just has a loop in it for our flanger and our phaser. No big deal, just like Eddie would have had. All right. And then from there, it goes into the Echoplex, which is the expanded Echoplex. And I did a few videos on what this is and what's in it. And it's basically a parallel FET along with an Echoplex delay unit. Out of there into the Small Box 3, which is just an unmodified, 70s, 71 plexi, 68 to 71, 72, 73 plexi preamp circuit, including a phase inverter with a transformer, a presence control that works through global negative feedback to try to get an accurate, Marshall sound that is lower gain, right? It's not the Jose one. We're going to be doing another board with the Jose preamp in it. So, keep that in mind. That's a different thing when we're going to be doing that because that thing's cool too. But this is for that first album. So that's the whole signal chain entering the amp, right? Buffer, phaser, flanger, Echoplex with the boost, Marshall. Done. Then what happens is we leave the Small Box preamp here and into this Hot One IR loader, right? And that's to reproduce the speaker cabinets, right? And the mic signal, right? Now, this is not a perfect solution by any stretch of the imagination. I hope these get better. And it doesn't quite as sound good as the aux does. It's not as transparent. I think there's some issues in terms of, maybe the converters or whatever, that it has a kind of a color to it that's hard to get rid of. But for the size of it, the cost of it, it's a miracle. Like if you had told me in the 80s that this thing was going to exist, I would have been like, yeah, maybe on Mars. So I ain't complaining about it. All right, so we got this thing set up for a cabinet, and we've got it. I loaded up a Celestion and a JBL into it and kind of EQ'd it a little bit in their software, and then made my own impulse response and loaded it into the IR loader. All right, so from the IR loader, we're going into this MXR EQ, which I don't think is a great solution. We're probably going to pull it off, but we're trying to get some of the inherent coloring of the Hot One out of there. But it also has the ability to drive something. All right. So what we were looking to do is this would have been, in a sense, the microphone, and this would have been the desk, right? So to speak. So we've got our EQs, we've got our input gain and output gain. All right. So we can really up the level. The next thing in the chain is the MXR Studio compressor, which is sort of like trying to model an 1176 compressor, which we've got a few of them back there. And if you want to know how that worked, look at a previous video regarding the 1176 madness. So anyway, what I'm trying to do is blow up this compressor. Now, it doesn't quite distort the same way that the real ones do. It doesn't have the same input circuit. It doesn't have the transformers in it. It doesn't have the, that preamp, which was shared among many of the URI components, including their EQs, their microphone preamps, the 1176s. They all had this one common stage in there, which was a really gritty stage. So we might have to build a box for that. So anyway, it goes into the compressor to get our squish, which I think is very important, right? Because it allows the guitar to sustain longer without it, let's say, without you having to use, a Bogner Ecstasy, which is a great amplifier, but it's, it's different sounding than a Plexi is, right? So this way we're getting the Plexi sound that just holds on and holds on and holds on and holds on. And in the other videos we were using, two of them together in a sense the same way that, like that Little Feat slide stuff was done, which really makes the signal hold on for an abnormally long amount of time, right? So that it really does sound like the amp is just gained out to the max, but the sustain just doesn't stop. All right, so we've got that. We've got it set on 20 to 1. And, basically the attack and release are up at noon. It's not quite the Dr. Pepper setting, but it's close to that. And it does sound a little bit like an 1176. I got to say, has a little bit of that kind of quality, but, a lot of compressors give that sound. All right, so I modified the compressor as well to go with 3 outputs, right? So there's 1 input and 3 outputs. There's a dry output that goes into our mixer, and under this Hall of Fame, there's a 3-channel mixer, right, with panning abilities, right? So I've got 3 signals that are mixing together into 2 left and right, okay? And they're panned in different places. So I've got a dry signal, one that's coming out of the studio compressor here, going directly into the mixer, and that's panned center, all right? And that's our main signal. The second output is feeding the flashback delay, which gives us kind of like this faint slapback, all right, which I think was on those sounds thanks to Mr. Beastie keying me in on that. I'm like, yeah, I do hear that. So and it doesn't sound like the Echoplex. So we put a flashback in there, and that's going into another input, and that's mixed, let's say, dead center pretty much. Actually, the dry signal is more to the left side, and the slapback signal is more towards the middle. And then finally, the third output of the compressor is going into the Hall of Fame, which we went into the tone print editor, and Mr. Beastie, them fuzzy monsters, keyed me into what the Bricasti sort of idea was when they modeled the Sunset Sound echo chamber. He gave me some basic specs to it, like as in, what was the decay, things like that. So I was able to go in and find a bright room at Mr. Beastie's suggestion, and modify the parameters inside the tone print software. Hook it up dry kill, so there's no dry signal at all in the reverb, and that goes into the third input, and that's panned hard to right. Okay, and hopefully I hooked it up to the mixer board down on the floor here that's mixing all these signals together correctly so that they do appear in left and right correctly. But if they don't, just move your headphones around. That's what I do. Anyway, let me get a sip of the pink drink here. Okay, so let's listen to this stupid thing, right? Let's see where we're at right now. So I'll turn on our little battery box, and now we're open into it. So it's like... raising up the volume a little bit. All right, so we've got what I think is a pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's getting there, right? Turn on the phaser. Forgive the sausage fingers. More sausages, more clams. Oops. All right. We can futz around a little bit. Let's say if we turn off the EQ, and then you guys can get some input in there. I got the EQ off. It's going to drop down the signal a little bit, so I'm going to have to bring it up with the output of the hot one. turn off the delay maybe. We're going to need this on for that. Turn that off. And if you can see on the small box, we don't even have the volume all the way up, right? We've got it at about 1 o'clock, so we could turn that up a little bit more, right? And then we can take off the compressor real quick too to show you what that's sort of doing. And it should drop down, or actually got a little louder. Right? All right, so I think that's a good sort of like demo for now. I think what we need to do is we need to maybe improve on the impulse response a little bit to try to get a little bit less of that sort of honk mid-range out of there. The compressor, we might try, let's say, a different method of going for that, you know, that distortion, the sort of the that thing. We could try a different method of getting there by, let's say, eliminating the EQ and building, let's say that it could be interesting to build the 1108 mic pre, right? Or the preamp that's in all of the Uri gear and kind of smash the crap out of it that way and then get into the compression and see what that does. But all in all, I mean, that is really the whole thing, you know? There's nothing else creating the sound. You know, I think it sounded pretty good. All right, so anyway, I think this has gone on long enough. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time when we're going to try something and put something new on the board. If you have any suggestions, leave it in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.